Same flame broiler, same Indianapolis factory, same 15-cent hamburger. In 1968, Burger Chef and McDonald's were neck and neck. 1,000 locations apiece, give or take, spread across the same American highways. Burger Chef had invented the combo meal. It had invented the kids' meal. It had a toppings bar where you dressed your own burger 6 years before anyone else tried it. Then General Foods, a company that made Jell-O and Tang, bought Burger Chef for $16 million. They replaced the flame broilers with electric griddles. They redesigned the buildings 4 times in a decade. Their own ad agency quit. Their own franchisees revolted. And in November of 1978, 4 teenagers in Burger Chef uniforms were murdered at a Speedway, Indiana, location that the police let reopen the next morning. By 1996, there wasn't a single Burger Chef left. McDonald's has 45,000. This is the story of 2 chains born from the same fire. How one became the largest restaurant company in human history, and how the other was stolen from, mismanaged to death, and forgotten. Chapter 1: 2 Flames. In 1972, there were 1,200 Burger Chef restaurants in America. 1,200, spread across 39 states, from Indiana to Arizona, from Michigan to Georgia. A fast food empire built on a flame broiler that could cook 2,000 burgers an hour and a 15-cent hamburger that fed a family of 4 for under $3. The company had invented the combo meal. It had invented the kids' meal. It had put a toppings bar in every restaurant 6 years before anyone else thought to try it. And it was gaining on McDonald's. Not theoretically, not aspirationally, but actually. McDonald's had 2,200 locations that year. Burger Chef had 1,200. The gap was closing. In raw numbers, Burger Chef was 55% of McDonald's size, and it was still growing. Today, there are 0 Burger Chef restaurants. Not one. The last sign came down in Cookeville, Tennessee, in July of 1996. 42 years after the first flame broiler lit up in Indianapolis, 18 years after 4 teenagers were murdered in their brown and orange polyester uniforms at a Speedway, Indiana, location that the police let reopen the next morning. The building that housed the original Burger Chef on West 16th Street is now a Burger King. The corporate headquarters at 1348 West 16th Street is a Kirby Risk electrical supply warehouse. 72 former Burger Chef buildings have been documented on landmark websites. Converted into Arby's restaurants, Chinese takeout joints, car washes, and banks. You can still see the diamond-shaped roofline under the new paint if you know what to look for. McDonald's, meanwhile, operates 45,356 restaurants in over 100 countries. It feeds 70 million people a day, more than the population of France. Its net income in a single year, 2025, was $8.5 billion. That number is roughly 195 times the price Burger Chef sold for when it was finally unloaded in 1982. This is the story of how that happened. How 2 fast food chains born from the same flame broiler, literally the same machine, built in the same Indianapolis factory, took 2 different paths through the same American landscape and arrived at 2 completely different destinations. One is the largest restaurant company in the history of the world. The other is a faded diamond on a strip mall roof that nobody under 40 recognizes. But this isn't just a story about restaurants. It's a story about a Jell-O company that bought a burger chain and killed it. About a kid's meal that was stolen in broad daylight and protected by nothing but a handshake. About a retired McDonald's executive who admitted 40 years later that the most successful marketing device in fast food history was taken directly from the competitor it helped destroy. And about 4 young people, Jane, Ruth, Danny, and Mark, who went to work on a Friday night in November 1978 and never came home. It starts with a carpenter in Peru, Indiana, and a pair of brothers from New Hampshire who couldn't make it in the movie business. Chapter 2. The Carpenter's Machine. Frank P. Thomas Sr. was born near Peru, Indiana in 1876, a trained carpenter with a mechanical mind who spent more time thinking about refrigeration than furniture. By 1929, while most of the country was watching its savings vanish, Thomas founded the General Equipment Company in Indianapolis to manufacture a frozen custard machine he'd designed and patented himself, the New Way. It was a compact, reliable dispenser that could turn out soft-serve ice cream at a pace no competitor could match. Over the next 2 decades, Thomas refined his designs. The Easy E-Way, the Sanny Serve, machines that several sources describe as the first patented soft-serve ice cream dispensers in America. He wasn't building an empire, he was solving engineering problems. The empire came later, and it came through his sons. In 1951, at age 75, Thomas Sr. retired and transferred his General Equipment stock to 3 people: his son, Frank Porter Thomas Jr., his younger son, Donald J. Thomas, and his son-in-law, Robert Bob Wildman. 3 men, 1 company, and a decision that would reshape American fast food, though none of them knew it yet. Frank Thomas Jr. was the driving force. Born June 15, 1919, in Peru, he'd graduated from Purdue in 1941, enlisted in the Army Air Corps 6 days after Pearl Harbor, and risen to the rank of major before coming home to take over his father's equipment business. He was 32 years old, an engineer by training, a pilot by wartime necessity, and a businessman by inheritance. His brother Donald handled the production floor, the nuts and bolts of manufacturing the soft-serve machines that were General Equipment's bread and butter. Wildman, their brother-in-law, had a different eye entirely. He was the one who thought about what the buildings should look like, how the customer should feel walking up to a counter. He hired Harry E. Cooler, an Indianapolis architect who'd studied under Frank Lloyd Wright and had already designed the Mills House and the Weir Cook Airport Administration Building, to create something no one had seen before in fast food. But the machine that changed everything wasn't a soft-serve dispenser. It was a flame broiler. In 1954, a Florida inventor named George Reed had built something called the Insta-Broiler, a compact unit, roughly 3 feet by 1 foot by 2.5 feet, that could cook both sides of a dozen patties simultaneously. 2 men in Jacksonville, Keith J. Kramer and Matthew Burns, had acquired Reed's rights and were using the machine in their small burger operation. Down in Miami, 2 more men, James W. McLemore and David R. Edgerton, had taken over the local franchise, and they weren't happy with the Insta-Broiler's limitations. Edgerton famously took a hatchet to one, determined to build something better. Frank Thomas Jr. saw the opportunity before anyone else did. In 1954, he agreed to mass-produce an improved version of the flame broiler at General Equipment's Indianapolis plant. The redesign was fundamental: a continuous chain gas flame broiler that sent patties on a chain-link conveyor vertically over open gas flames, producing grill marks identical to charcoal cooking. The initial model could handle 1,000 burgers an hour. By 1957, Thomas had doubled the output to 2,000 an hour, with an order-to-serve time of roughly 20 seconds. General Equipment held the marketing rights to the improved broiler in every state except Florida. That meant Thomas was supplying the cooking technology to both camps: to the Miami operation that would become Burger King, and to the chain he was about to build himself. The same Indianapolis factory, the same flame, 2 different futures. Here's where the story splits in a way that matters. Thomas didn't just sell the machine, he decided to prove it. In May of 1957, he opened a pilot restaurant at the Little America Amusement Center across from the new Glendale Shopping Center at 62nd and Keystone Avenue in Indianapolis. A newspaper ad from March 24, 1957, called it Indianapolis's first Florida-style self-service drive-in. Thomas named it Burger Chef, reportedly as a more highbrow answer to Burger King. The restaurant was a showcase for General Equipment's machines, a proof of concept with a walk-up window, no indoor seating, and a menu that would define the next decade of American fast food. Hamburger, 15 cents. Fries, 15 cents. Milkshake, 15 cents. And the combination that Time magazine would later credit as the first fast food combo meal ever advertised, the triple treat, a burger, fries, and a shake for 45 cents. Robert Wildman and Harry Cooler gave the building a look that stopped traffic. A steep, diamond-shaped roof arch crowned with an angular sign. A kite-shaped street pylon, originally neon, later backlit plexiglass. Symmetrical triangular archways that customers walked under. Diamond motifs running along the facade and eave. Yellow, red, and orange everywhere. Thomas patented the building design in 1960. It was distinctive enough that 60 years later, you can still spot a former burger chef from the highway if the new owner didn't bother tearing down the roofline. By spring of 1958, the first full-fledged standalone burger chef opened on West 16th Street in Indianapolis. The corporate headquarters right next door at 1348. A nearby State Fairgrounds location on 38th Street served as both flagship and training facility. The early stores were walk-up only. No indoor seating, just a counter and a window, and that diamond-shaped roofline catching the sun. The flame broiler was visible through the service window, sending up a haze of charred beef smoke that hit you 20 feet from the building. A family of 4 could walk up, order 4 burgers, 4 fries, and 4 shakes, and walk away having spent $1.80. That math, under $2 for a family meal, was the engine. By 1959, there were 8 burger chefs in Indiana, Ohio, and Missouri. By 1960, roughly 70. Henry J. Hank Schroeder II opened a franchise in Danville, Illinois in 1960, one of the earliest operators, and a name that would matter decades later when his family's restaurant became the last location in America still carrying anything resembling the burger chef identity. Area supervisors like Bud Loff and Bob Wright fanned out across the Midwest, scouting locations, training crews, building the network one restaurant at a time. By September 1st, 1965, 7 years after the first permanent store, the 450th Burger Chef opened at 6 East Washington Street in Indianapolis. The chain was in 34 states. The initial franchise investment ran about $129,000, with operators averaging 50% annual return on their money. Those numbers drew people in fast. Frank Thomas Jr. had built something remarkable. A fast food operation anchored by proprietary cooking technology no competitor could replicate without buying his machines. A building design so distinctive it functioned as its own advertisement. A price point that made McDonald's look like a peer, not a leader. And a franchise model that accelerated growth by co-signing franchisee mortgages. Putting Burger Chef's own collateral behind every new restaurant that opened. It was generous. It was effective. And it was, as it turned out, a ticking clock. But McDonald's had something Thomas didn't. A man who understood that the food was almost beside the point. Chapter 3. The Brothers Who Quit the Movie Business. Morris James McDonald was born November 26, 1902, in Manchester, New Hampshire. His younger brother, Richard James McDonald, arrived February 16, 1909. Same town, same house, same Irish Catholic parents. Patrick James McDonald and Margaret Anna Curran McDonald had emigrated from the west coast of Ireland, from Dingle and Emlamore, carrying the immigrant's arithmetic. Work harder than everyone else. Save everything and make sure your children do better. Mac and Dick didn't follow the script. They left New England for California in the 1920s, chasing something less disciplined than their parents had in mind. They tried the movie business, ran a small studio and a theater called The Beacon in Glendora. It didn't work. The brothers weren't Hollywood material. But they'd learned one thing in California that would matter more than anything they picked up in New Hampshire. In this state, people lived in their cars. They drove to work. They drove to the beach. They drove to church. And they were willing to eat in the car if someone would bring the food to the window. In 1937, Mac and Dick opened a hot dog and orange juice stand in Monrovia on Route 66. Their goal, stated to each other plainly, was to make $1 million apiece before they turned 50. They were 35 and 28. The clock was running. 3 years later, May 15, 1940, they opened McDonald's Barbecue at 1398 Northeast Street in San Bernardino. It was an octagonal building with an exposed kitchen, about 20 car hops working the lot, and a menu of roughly 25 items. Pulled pork, ribs, hamburgers, the works. On peak weekends, 125 cars packed the lot. Annual sales topped $200,000. By the standards of post-war San Bernardino, the McDonald brothers were a success. But Dick McDonald was restless. He'd been studying the numbers, and the numbers told a story the menu didn't. 3 items, hamburgers, French fries, and Coca-Cola, accounted for nearly all of their profit. Everything else was noise. The ribs were popular, but labor-intensive. The car hops were expensive and slow. The 25-item menu created chaos in the kitchen. Dick looked at a restaurant that grossed $200,000 a year and saw a machine that was running at a fraction of its capacity because nobody had stripped it down to the parts that actually worked. In 1948, the brothers closed McDonald's Barbecue for 3 months. When it reopened in December, it was unrecognizable. The menu had been slashed from 25 items to 9. Hamburger, 15 cents. Cheeseburger, 19 cents. Fries, 10 cents. Shakes, 20 cents. Coffee, a nickel. Every car hop was fired. The outdoor counter became 2 walk-up windows. There was no indoor seating. The kitchen was reorganized into an assembly line. 1 worker grilled, 1 dressed buns with standardized condiments, ketchup, mustard, onions, 2 pickles, no substitutions, 1 fried, 1 made shakes. Service time, 30 seconds. Dick McDonald had a phrase for it. If we gave people choice, he said, there would be chaos. They called it the Speedy service system, and they gave it a mascot. Speedy, a winking chef with a hamburger-shaped head, a chef's hat, a white shirt, a black tie, and striped trousers. He debuted in 1948 and lasted until 1962, when the company retired him partly to avoid confusion with Alka-Seltzer's Speedy character. But the system he represented outlived him by decades. The speed created volume. The volume drove down costs. The low costs allowed low prices. The low prices drew crowds. The crowds justified more speed. It was a flywheel, and once it started spinning, it didn't stop. The brothers commissioned architect Stanley Clark Meston, working with assistant Charles Fish out of Fontana, California, to design a standardized building. Dick McDonald sketched the concept himself, 2 half-circle arches flanking the structure. Meston and Fish refined them into 25-foot parabolic arches trimmed in yellow neon. Sign contractor George Dexter fabricated them. The golden arches weren't designed by a branding agency. They were sketched on a napkin by a former hot dog vendor from New Hampshire. The first franchise went to Neil Fox, a General Petroleum distributor who opened at 4050 North Central Avenue in Phoenix, Arizona, in May 1953. The second went to Roger Williams and Burdette Bud Landon, who opened in Downey, California, on August 18, 1953. That location still stands, the oldest surviving McDonald's building in the world. The brothers had built the prototype, the assembly line, the arches, the price point. What they hadn't built, and would never build, was a way to put it everywhere. They were operators, not empire builders. They wanted their $1 million. They didn't particularly want 10,000 restaurants. That ambition belonged to someone else. And he was already on his way to San Bernardino. Chapter 4, The Multi-Mixer Man. Raymond Albert Kroc was born October 5, 1902, in Oak Park, Illinois. The same year as Mac McDonald, though the two men could not have been more different. Kroc was Czech-American, a high school dropout at 15, a Red Cross Ambulance Corps volunteer in the First World War, who trained alongside a young Walt Disney in the same unit. He'd played jazz piano in speakeasies. He'd sold paper cups. He'd sold real estate in Florida during the boom and lost everything in the bust. By the time he found what he was looking for, he was 52 years old, selling multi-mixer milkshake machines out of the trunk of his car. 5 spindle units that could make 40 shakes at once. The McDonald brothers in San Bernardino had ordered 8 of them, 8 multi-mixers. 40 simultaneous shakes. Kroc had never seen an order like that. He drove to 1398 North E Street to find out what kind of restaurant needed that much milkshake capacity. What he found was the speedy service system at full throttle. The assembly line, the 30-second service, the crowds, the 15-cent hamburger. He wrote later in his memoir, "When I saw it working that day in 1954, I felt like some latter-day Newton who just had an Idaho potato caromed off his skull." But here's what Kroc saw that the McDonald brothers didn't. He didn't see a great restaurant. He saw a great restaurant that could be copied. Exactly. Everywhere. The genius of the Speedy system wasn't just the speed, it was the standardization. The kitchen was a machine. Every patty the same weight. Every bun the same width, every portion of fries the same cut. If you could replicate the machine, you could replicate the restaurant. And if you could replicate the restaurant, you could put one on every highway exit in America. In 1954, Kroc negotiated a 10-year master franchise agreement with the brothers. National U.S. rights to open McDonald's restaurants. The franchise fee was $950. Kroc would receive 1.9% of each franchisee's gross sales. Of that, 0.5% went back to the brothers. On March 2, 1955, Kroc incorporated McDonald's System Incorporated. On April 15, 1955, the first Kroc-franchised McDonald's opened at 400 North Lee Street in Des Plaines, Illinois. First day sales, $366.12. There's a detail here that matters enormously for the story ahead. Kroc made a decision in those early months that Frank Thomas Jr. in Indianapolis did not make, and it would determine everything that followed. Kroc refused territorial franchises. Territorial franchising was the fast money play. Sell an investor the rights to an entire state or region, collect a large upfront payment, and let them figure out the details. It was how Burger King expanded early. It was how Tasty Freeze grew. It was, essentially, how Burger Chef grew. Thomas had franchisees co-signing mortgages on restaurant properties, leveraging the chain's collateral to accelerate expansion. It worked fast. But it meant every new restaurant was backed by the same shrinking pool of corporate guarantees. And it meant the franchisees who controlled territory weren't necessarily the people flipping burgers. They were investors, often absentee, sometimes running dozens of locations with hired managers who had no ownership stake in the outcome. Kroc did the opposite. Single-store franchises only. The franchisee had to be the owner-operator, on-site, working the restaurant. $950 plus 1.9% of gross. No territorial rights, no absentee investors. In business for yourself, Kroc told them, but not by yourself. It was slower, it was harder, it produced less cash in the short term, and it created something Burger Chef never had, an army of owners who had everything riding on each individual restaurant being excellent. Because for a McDonald's franchisee, there was no next location. There was only the one you were standing in. And then, in 1961, Kroc did something that revealed exactly how far he was willing to go. The McDonald brothers wanted out. They asked for $2,700,000, $1 million each after taxes, plus $700,000 for taxes, and their attorney, Frank Cotter. Harry Sunborn arranged financing through a consortium that included Paul Revere Life Insurance, State Mutual Life of Worcester, the Massachusetts Protective Association, Princeton University's endowment, and the Ford Foundation. Kroc gave up 22.5% of his equity to get the deal done. The brothers insisted on keeping one thing, a verbal agreement for a continuing royalty. 0.5% of future revenue. Kroc agreed. But including it in the written contract, he said, would jeopardize the financing. So it stayed a handshake. The royalty was never paid, not a cent. Decades later, the brothers' nephews calculated it would have been worth over $100 million a year. The original San Bernardino restaurant was excluded from the sale. The brothers kept it, but they lost the McDonald's name. They renamed it the Big M. Kroc opened a competing McDonald's a block away and drove the Big M out of business within 6 years. The building at 1398 North E Street was demolished in 1971. Dick McDonald wrote in a letter years later, "During the years from the time we first met Ray Kroc in 1954, there was never any mention over the years that Ray was founder of McDonald's. However, after we sold to Ray and his associates, he was elevated to be the founder." Kroc didn't steal the recipe. He didn't steal the name, he bought it. What he did was erase the people who created it. And then he built something they never could have. Chapter 5. The Genius of the Landlord. The man who made McDonald's unstoppable wasn't Ray Kroc. It was a former Tasty Freeze executive from Evansville, Indiana, named Harry J. Sunborn, born Harold Morris Joseph on June 12, 1916. The kind of finance mind that sees money where everyone else sees hamburgers. Sunborn approached Kroc in 1955 with an idea so simple it sounds obvious now and so revolutionary it rebuilt American capitalism. McDonald's, Sunborn argued, shouldn't just franchise restaurants. It should own the land underneath them. In 1956, Kroc incorporated Franchise Realty Corporation. The model worked like this. McDonald's would lease, and later purchase, the land in the building. Then, it would sublease the entire package to the franchisee. The franchisee paid a deposit of $950, rent marked up 20% over McDonald's route lease, eventually 40%. with a minimum floor, plus 5% of gross sales above a base threshold, plus the standard 1.9% service fee, plus taxes, insurance, and maintenance. The lease ran 20 years. 20 years. That was the weapon. If you were a McDonald's franchisee, the company didn't just license you the name, it owned the ground you stood on. Violate the operating standards, let the fries get soggy, let the bathrooms get dirty, let the service slow down, and McDonald's could terminate your lease. And when your lease was gone, your restaurant was gone. You didn't lose a franchise agreement, you lost a building. It was genius, and it was ruthless, and Sonneborn said it out loud. Speaking to securities analysts, he delivered the line that should be etched on McDonald's tombstone if the company ever dies. We are not technically in the food business. We are in the real estate business. The only reason we sell 15-cent hamburgers is because they are the greatest producer of revenue from which our tenants can pay us our rent. Burger Chef had nothing like this. Thomas's franchisees owned or leased their own properties. The chain co-signed mortgages to help them get started. A generous, community-minded approach that accelerated growth beautifully and left Burger Chef progressively drained of the collateral it needed to survive a downturn. When things went well, Burger Chef's model looked like partnership. When things went badly, it looked like a company that had mortgaged its future to build the present. After McDonald's switched fully to the Sonneborn model in 1958, it added 68 restaurants in a single year. Sonneborn became president and CEO in 1959. The real estate engine was running, and it would never stop. Meanwhile, the man who would turn McDonald's kitchens into the most standardized food production system on earth was learning the grill at Des Plaines. Chapter 6. The Bible and the Broiler. Frederick Leo Turner was born January 6, 1933 in Des Moines, Iowa. Drake University, class of 1954. 2 years in the Army. Then, in 1956, he walked into the Des Plaines McDonald's and took a job as a grillman. He was 23. Within 2 years, he was vice president of operations. Within 12, he was president of the company. Within 17, he was CEO. And within 21, he was chairman. But the thing Turner did that mattered most happened in 1958, when he sat down and wrote a 75-page document that McDonald's employees would come to call the Bible. It was the operations and training manual, and it specified everything. French fries, 0.28 inches thick. Hamburger patties, 1.6 ounces, 10 per pound, 3.875 inches in diameter, 0.2 to 1 inches thick. Buns, 3.5 inches wide. 19 steps for cooking fries. Not guidelines, not suggestions, specifications. The manual didn't tell you how to run a restaurant. It told you how to run this restaurant, McDonald's. And it told you in a level of detail that made deviation essentially impossible if you followed it. Turner coined quality, service, cleanliness, QSC. Kroc added value, QSC and V. And in 1961, Turner and Kroc together founded Hamburger University in the basement of the Elk Grove Village, Illinois McDonald's. The first class graduated on February 24, 1961, with a degree the school called, without irony, a Bachelor of Hamburgerology. It sounds like a joke. It wasn't. Hamburger University was the institutionalization of Kroc's obsession with consistency. Every franchisee went through it. Every manager went through it. The curriculum was the manual. The manual was the standard. The standard was the brand. And the brand, enforced by the real estate lease that could be pulled at any time, was what every customer in every city in every state could rely on being exactly the same. Burger Chef had a training partnership with Indiana Central College. It was real, and it was genuine, and it wasn't remotely comparable in scale or rigor. General Equipment made great machines. Frank Thomas Jr. designed great restaurants. But nobody at Burger Chef wrote a 75-page document specifying the thickness of a French fry to the hundredth of an inch. And nobody at Burger Chef could pull your lease if you let the ketchup dispensers run dry. Here's where the numbers tell the story most cleanly. Both chains hit the ground running in the late 1950s. Both expanded aggressively through the 1960s. Both were building restaurants as fast as they could find franchisees to run them. But the trajectories, year by year, reveal the structural difference beneath the surface. By 1960, McDonald's had 228 franchises. Burger Chef had about 70. By 1963, McDonald's served its billionth hamburger and opened its 500th restaurant. By 1965, McDonald's went public. 700 locations, listed on the New York Stock Exchange on April 21st, underwritten by Payne, Weber, Jackson, and Curtis at $22.50 a share. It closed the first day around 30. By the end of the first month, 50. 100 shares bought for $2,250 that day would, through 12 subsequent stock splits, become more than 32,000 shares. Burger Chef was expanding too, and in some ways more impressively. 134 locations opened in 1966 alone. By 1967, Burger Chef was the second largest restaurant chain in America. The 450th store had opened 2 years earlier. The chain was in 34 states, and the innovations coming out of Indianapolis were, by any honest measure, ahead of what McDonald's was doing. In 1964, Burger Chef introduced the Big Chef, 2 flame-broiled beef patties, American cheese, shredded lettuce, a Miracle Whip-based special sauce, on a triple-decker sesame seed bun. That was 3 years before Jim Delegati, a McDonald's franchisee in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, invented the Big Mac in 1967. Same architecture, same double patty concept, same special sauce, same sesame seed bun. The Big Chef was there first. The Super Chef followed, a quarter-pound flame-broiled burger with cheese, lettuce, tomato, onion, pickles, and ketchup. Burger Chef's answer to the Whopper. And because General Equipment supplied the flame broilers to Burger King as well, the Super Chef and the Whopper were cooked on functionally identical machines. Frank Thomas Jr. was, in the most literal sense, powering his own competition. The triple treat combo, burger, fries, shake for 45 cents, had been on the menu since 1957. Time magazine later credited it as the first advertised fast food combo meal. A fish sandwich arrived in 1964, targeting the Catholic market. Apple turnovers followed the same year, the first dessert item in the chain's history. Every one of these innovations preceded or paralleled McDonald's own moves by years. And then came the idea that would define Burger Chef's legacy more than any other, and would be stolen in plain sight. Chapter 7. The Funmeal and the Fork in the Road. In 1973, Burger Chef did something no fast food chain had attempted. It installed a self-service toppings bar, the Works Bar, in every restaurant. Ketchup, mustard, mayonnaise, pickles, onions, lettuce, tomato, relish, all in stainless steel compartments with tongs. You ordered your burger with kitchen dressed or without plain for self-dressing at the bar. It drove the late 70s slogan, "We really give you the works." And it worked so well that 3 decades later, Five Guys would essentially build a billion-dollar empire on the same principle. Wendy's didn't introduce a salad bar until 1979, 6 years after Burger Chef had already proven the concept. But the Works bar wasn't even the most important thing Burger Chef invented that decade. In 1972, Burger Chef introduced the Fun Burger, a child-sized hamburger wrapped in packaging printed with puzzles, comics, and a small toy premium tucked inside. A year later, in 1973, the concept expanded into the Funmeal. A small hamburger, French fries, a drink, a cookie, and a toy. Yo-yos, flexi-disc records with stories, punch-out cardboard figures, redemption tokens for frozen treats. All packaged in a paperboard box printed with stories, riddles, mazes, and comics featuring Burger Chef and Jeff, the chain's mascot duo. The adult chef in the toque, voiced by Paul Winchell, the same ventriloquist who gave voice to Tigger in Winnie the Pooh and Gargamel in the Smurfs. And Jeff, the juvenile sidekick in an oversized chef's hat. The Fun Meal wasn't a promotional gimmick. It was a fully realized branded boxed kids meal with a dedicated toy, the first in fast food history. It came in dedicated packaging. It had its own mascot ecosystem, the Fangburger Gang, Burgerini the Magician, Count Fangburger the Vampire, Burgerilla the Talking Gorilla, Cackleburger the Witch. By 1978, the Fun Meal featured Star Wars punch-out cardboard figures, widely cited as the first major movie tie-in ever offered in a fast food kids item. McDonald's launched the Happy Meal nationally in June of 1979. The man behind it was Robert Bob Bernstein, founder of Bernstein Rhine Advertising in Kansas City, who'd held McDonald's regional co-op advertising work for over a decade. The concept had been commissioned by Dick Brams, McDonald's regional advertising manager based in St. Louis. Bernstein's inspiration, he said, was watching his 9-year-old son, Steve, read the back of cereal boxes every morning at breakfast. A Cleveland ad man named Joe Johnston had been given a $700 McDonald's research budget and proposed a Fun Meal activities sack, a name that echoed Burger Chef's Fun Meal with precision that's hard to call coincidental. But the confirmation didn't come for 40 years. In 2019, Paul Schrage, a retired McDonald's senior executive vice president, the executive who had approved the Happy Meal's national rollout, told the Chicago Tribune, "The idea came from our competitor, Burger Chef, which had been offering gifts to kids. Our regional ad manager in St. Louis, Dick Brams, was aware of this and thought it was a nifty idea, and he contacted a guy in Kansas City named Bob Bernstein, a retired McDonald's SEVP, on the record, in print, confirming that the most successful marketing device in fast food history, tens of billions served, a cultural institution recognized on every continent, came directly from the competitor it helped destroy. Burger Chef sued, filed in 1979, shortly before the national Happy Meal launch. The claim, trademark infringement and unfair competition. Damages sought $5.5 million. Burger Chef lost. The court ruled that the concept of bundling food with toys in child-oriented packaging was too broad to merit trademark protection, and the specific characters differed. The decisive weakness. Burger Chef had never formally trademarked or patented the core Fun Meal elements. The idea was theirs. The paperwork wasn't. The Happy Meal became a permanent fixture in American childhood. The Fun Meal sur Asa, which preceded it by 6 years, had a richer mascot universe and had pioneered movie tie-ins with Star Wars before McDonald's got anywhere near a film studio, was forgotten by everyone except trademark lawyers. By the time that lawsuit was filed, both chains were staring at the same fork in the road. It was 1968. The gap between them was as narrow as it would ever be. McDonald's at roughly 1,000 locations, Burger Chef somewhere between 600 and 730. Both were growing. Both were profitable. Both had a signature burger, a loyal customer base, and a building you could spot from the highway. But in 1968, two very different decisions were made. Ray Kroc kept McDonald's independent, publicly traded, obsessively controlled. And Frank Thomas Jr. sold Burger Chef to a company that made Jell-O. That decision, and everything that followed from it, is why one chain feeds 70 million people a day, and the other exists only in the memories of people who can still taste a big chef if they close their eyes long enough. Chapter 8. White Plains. On October 16, 1967, the Wall Street Journal reported that General Foods Corporation intended to acquire Burger Chef Systems, Inc. The timing wasn't accidental. 2 months earlier, Pillsbury had acquired Burger King. Ralston Purina already owned Jack in the Box. The packaged goods conglomerates were moving into fast food, and General Foods, the largest food manufacturer in America, home of Jell-O Maxwell House, Post cereals, Bird's Eye frozen vegetables, Kool-Aid, Tang, and Shake and Bake, didn't want to be the last giant standing outside the restaurant business, while smaller rivals claimed territory. The formal signing took place in March 1968 at General Foods headquarters in White Plains, New York. A photograph from the ceremony shows 5 men in dark suits around a conference table. Frank Thomas Jr. and his brother Donald on one side, Robert Wildman and Burger Chef chairman George Perry beside them, and across the table, Arthur E. Larkin, Jr. President of General Foods, the executive whose name would be most closely associated with the diversification strategy that led to this moment. The purchase price has been argued about for 6 decades. Newspaper stories quote 20 million. The Indianapolis Business Journal says 25. But the most authoritative numbers come from federal court opinions that cited discovery documents in franchise litigation years later. The Thomas family and shareholders received approximately $16 to $16.5 million in equity. General Foods assumed roughly $58 million in liabilities. The mortgages, the lease obligations, the co-signed guarantees that had fueled Burger Chef's expansion across 39 states. Total transaction value, approximately $75 million. The deal was structured as a stock swap and merger, making Burger Chef a wholly owned subsidiary. The man who wanted this deal most was Chauncey William Wallace Cook, Tex to everyone who knew him, who'd succeeded Charles Mortimer as General Foods chairman and CEO in 1966. Cook was a post-war diversification believer. Under his watch, General Foods had already acquired SOS scouring pads in 1957, later divested under an antitrust order in 1968. It would go on to buy Vivienne Woodard Cosmetics for $39 million in December 1969, Connor Brothers Toys in 1970, and W. Atlee Burpee Seeds in 1970. And it picked up Rack's Roast Beef in 1969, just a year after Burger Chef. Cook believed, as Pillsbury believed, as Ralston Purina believed, as every packaged goods company in America seemed to believe in 1968, that marketing expertise transferred, that a corporation that could sell instant pudding to 50 million households could sell hamburgers to the same 50 million households with equal efficiency. The premise was logical. It was also catastrophically wrong. Larkin was the deal's champion within General Foods. He saw Burger Chef's trajectory. 134 new locations in 1966 alone, second largest chain in America. The flame broiler technology that no competitor could replicate without buying the Thomas family's machines. And he projected those numbers forward onto General Foods' balance sheet. What Larkin didn't examine, or chose not to examine, was what lay beneath the growth. The co-signed mortgages that drained Burger Chef's collateral with every new franchise. The territorial operators running multiple locations through hired managers. The absence of any real estate control mechanism comparable to McDonald's lease system. General Foods was buying a company that grew by taking on the debt of its own franchisees. It was a business model that worked beautifully as long as every single restaurant stayed profitable. The moment a few dozen didn't, the whole structure would buckle. And nobody in White Plains understood this, because nobody in White Plains had ever run a restaurant. Frank Thomas Jr. took his money and stayed through the transition. But by 1970, he was gone. He moved to Taos, New Mexico, and lived there quietly until his death on June 16, 2008, at the age of 89. His brother Donald had predeceased him. Neither brother publicly commented on what General Foods did to the chain their father's machines had made possible. Don Thomas Jr., Donald's son, continued running Sanny Serve, the soft serve equipment company, out of Mooresville, Indiana, well into the 2000s. The Thomas family stayed in the equipment business. They let the restaurant business go. The competitive landscape that General Foods was entering was far more crowded and more vicious than the one Thomas had navigated in the early 60s. Burger King, now under Pillsbury's ownership, had 274 locations at the time of its sale and was accelerating. It would reach 800 by 1972 and 2,700 by 1980. Hardee's, founded in 1960 in Greenville, North Carolina, by Leonard Rawls and James Gardner, had roughly 200 locations by 1970 and would hit 1,000 by 1975. And on November 15, 1969, in Columbus, Ohio, a former KFC franchisee named Dave Thomas, no relation to the Indiana Thomases, opened the first Wendy's. It would reach 520 locations by 1976 and 3,000 by 1985. The burger market that General Foods thought it understood was about to get crowded in ways that demanded operational agility. The one thing a packaged goods conglomerate structurally could not provide. For a few years after the sale, the silence from the founders didn't matter. Burger Chef kept opening restaurants. The menu kept expanding. The brand still meant what it had always meant: a flame-broiled burger at a working family's price in a building shaped like a diamond. If you walked into a Burger Chef in 1970 or 1971, you would have seen no evidence that anything fundamental had changed. The uniforms were the same. The Works bar was there. The flame broiler was running. The Funmeal boxes were stacked beside the register. Everything looked healthy. What you couldn't see was the boardroom. And in the boardroom, a Jell-O company was about to make a series of decisions that would gut the chain from the inside out. But that's ahead of us. Before the destruction, there was a moment when everything worked. When a Burger Chef on a Friday night was one of the best places in America to be 12 years old. That moment deserves its full measure before it's gone. Chapter 9. Inside the Diamond. Imagine walking into the Burger Chef on 38th Street in Indianapolis on a Friday evening in 1973. Not the corporate headquarters location, the training store, the flagship, near the state fairgrounds, where the crews were sharper and the broiler was cleaner than anywhere else in the system. You come through the triangular archway and the smell is immediate. Charred beef fat catching flame, the sweetness of toasting sesame seed buns, and underneath it all, the fryer oil, sharp and heavy. The the universal perfume of American fast food in the 1970s. The flame broiler is visible through the service window. You can see the chain-link conveyor moving, patties riding upward through columns of blue-yellow gas flame, the edges of the meat browning and curling, grease dripping onto the burners, with a hiss you can hear from the counter. It's theater. McDonald's cooked on a flat griddle behind a wall. Burger King's broiler was enclosed. Burger Chef let you watch the fire. The counter crew is in brown slacks and orange and brown striped polyester shirts. The color scheme that defined the decade the way turquoise and chrome had defined the 50s. Paper Chef's hats. Embroidered patches on the chest. The Burger Chef character, smiling under his toque, blue bow tie knotted neat. The overhead menu board, white plastic letters pressed into grooved brown felt, lists the signatures. Big Chef, 59 cents. Super Chef, 89 cents. Regular hamburger, still hovering near 25 cents. Fries in red and white scoop cartons. Shakes in 3 flavors. Apple turnover, the frosting baked onto the bottom, so it peeled off in a sweet sheet when you unwrapped the wax paper. A fish sandwich for the Catholic market. And the triple treat, burger, fries, shake. The original combo meal, still going strong 16 years after it debuted. You order at the counter. The crew member slides your tray across. Burgers in wax paper wraps stamped with the Burger Chef logo, fries in the scoop cartons, drink in a paper cup. Then you walk to the works bar. 10 stainless steel compartments in a row. Ketchup, mustard, mayonnaise, pickles, onions, lettuce, tomato, relish, hot peppers, and a cheese sauce that would harden into a rubbery orange skin if you let it sit too long. Tongs for the lettuce. Squeeze bottles for the sauces. You built your burger the way you wanted it, piled as much of everything as you could fit between the bun halves, and nobody charged you extra for a second handful of onions. It was the honor system applied to condiments, and it worked, partly because the overhead cost of extra pickles was negligible, and partly because American families in 1973 had an innate respect for a free thing well offered. Former customers still describe the Works Bar with the kind of precision that only real memory produces. It wasn't a condiment station, it was a ritual. The dining room was orange tile floors, orange vinyl booths, chrome napkin dispensers, and fluorescent light softened by warm tones everywhere. The second-generation enclosed kite buildings had aluminum and glass walls that let daylight in during the afternoon and turned the interior into a warm orange glow at night. You could see the parking lot through the glass. On a Friday, it was full. Station wagons, sedans, pickup trucks, the occasional van. Families with 3 kids and a dog waiting in the car. Teenagers on dates who couldn't afford anything more expensive. Retirees who came every morning for coffee and a hamburger and sat in the same booth until the lunch rush pushed them out. The kids got Funmeals. The paperboard box was half the appeal, printed with mazes, riddles, stories featuring the Fangburger gang. Count Fangburger in his cape. Burgerilla pounding his chest, Cackleburger on her broomstick, Burgerini pulling a hamburger from a top hat. Inside, a small burger, fries, a drink, a cookie, and the toy. The toys changed monthly. Yo-yos, flexi-disc records you could play on a turntable, punch-out cardboard figures, redemption tokens for frozen treats at the counter. In 1977 and 1978, the Funmeal promotions featured Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. Collectible posters and cardboard punch-outs, including a full C-3PO figure. These were among the earliest major movie tie-ins in fast food history, a year before McDonald's got near a film studio with its December 1979 Star Trek, the motion picture Happy Meal. Those Star Wars Funmeal items are worth real money on eBay now, handled with cotton gloves by collectors who remember pulling them out of a box with ketchup-stained fingers. A kid in Kokomo, Indiana, in 1973 might have seen Burt Ward, Robin from Batman, appear at the local franchise for a promotional event. The chain ran King Kong drinking glasses in 1976 and 1977. NFL collector glasses in 1979. Celebrity appearances and movie tie-ins and collectible glassware. All of it streaming out of a chain that most Americans alive today have never heard of. The television ads featured Burger Chef and Jeff, the adult chef, and the kid in the oversized hat, animated in the cheerful, slightly cheap style of early 70s Saturday morning cartoons. Paul Winchell gave the chef his voice, that warm baritone he also used for Tigger. The slogan cycled, "There's more to like at Burger Chef." You get more to like at Burger Chef. Burger Chef puts magic in your meal. By the late 70s, we really give you the works, and open wide America, you never can forget. The irony of that last line would take decades to land. America did forget, almost completely. Henry Schroeder's franchise in Danville, Illinois, had been running since 1960. One of the oldest in the system. His son Butch worked the floor and would eventually take it over. Jim Cowie, a former Burger Chef area supervisor, ran Susie's Hamburgers in South Charleston, West Virginia, named for his wife, in a preserved Burger Chef building where Bernie Wagner had been area supervisor back in 1969. Down in Cleveland, Tennessee, a franchise built in 1967 had been sold and resold and would eventually end up in the hands of Ross Weaver, who inherited it from his father, a location that would still be serving burgers in its original building half a century later. The only former Burger Chef in the country that never closed, just changed names. These were the people who carried the brand on their backs. They knew every regular. They hired the neighborhood kids. They kept the works bar stocked and the broiler clean and the parking lot swept. Whatever was happening in White Plains, the restaurants on the ground were still doing what Frank Thomas had built them to do. The architecture told part of the story, and its evolution told the rest. The earliest stores, the open kite design from the late 50s, had that steep diamond-shaped roof and white enamel panels with large orange diamonds, walk-up ordering, no indoor seating. By 1964, the enclosed kite buildings added aluminum and glass walls. The Cosmopolitan II design in 1968 brought natural materials and muted colors while keeping the distinctive roofline. And then, as the 1970s wore on and suburban zoning boards pushed back against roadside architecture, Burger Chef rolled out the W3, mansard-style brick with exterior motifs that ranged from colonial to country modern. McDonald's had done the same thing in 1969 with its Madison, Illinois, mansard prototype. Both chains were being domesticated, traded their visual identity for neighborhood approval. But for McDonald's, the golden arches survived every building redesign. For Burger Chef, the diamond was already fading. On television, the chain was everywhere, at least in its core markets. The Burger Chef and Jeff animated spots ran on local and regional networks, sandwiched between Scooby-Doo episodes and action news at 5. A generation of Midwestern kids grew up associating that cartoon chef with Saturday afternoon. And in May of 2014, decades after the chain had vanished, the AMC drama Mad Men aired The Strategy, a Season 7 episode in which Peggy Olson pitched a fictional campaign for Burger Chef. It was the chain's most significant cultural moment in 30 years. And it happened on a show about the 1960s advertising industry. The fact that Burger Chef needed a prestige cable drama to remind America it existed told you everything about what had been lost. A 1971 to 1977 Ohio manager wrote years later, "The original Burger Chefs I worked at had just 4 to 6 booths and a long stand-up counter in the front of the restaurant." Another former customer, remembering the 15-cent era, "My main takeaway is my ability to run the 15 times multiplication tables quicker than anyone in town. When everything being sold is 15 cents, that tends to happen." That's what Burger Chef was, a place where the math was simple and the burger tasted like fire. Chapter 10. The Machine Behind the Arches. While Burger Chef was serving flame-broiled burgers through diamond-shaped archways in the Midwest, Ray Kroc was building something that didn't resemble a restaurant company at all. It resembled a franchise army with a real estate treasury and a marketing department that understood American childhood better than any corporation in history. Ronald McDonald debuted in 1963. Willard Scott, who'd later become the NBC Today Show weatherman, played the character first, appearing in a Washington, D.C. market for local franchisee Oscar Goldstein. The original costume was improvised: a paper cup on the nose, a cardboard tray on the head, food items dangling from a utility belt. Absurd and effective enough for the local market. But in 1966, Michael Polikovs, a Latvian circus performer known professionally as Coco the Clown, redesigned the character into the version the world would recognize. The red and yellow jumpsuit, the painted face, the oversized shoes. By 1971, Ronald had a full supporting cast. Mayor McCheese, the Hamburglar, Grimace, originally a terrifying 4-armed purple blob called Evil Grimace before being softened into a lovable oaf, Captain Crook, the Fry Kids. McDonaldland was a complete mythology, a Saturday morning universe built to sell hamburgers to children. Burger Chef had 2 animated characters and a gang of Halloween monsters. McDonald's had a world. The advertising matched the ambition. In 1971, copywriter Keith Reinhard at Needham, Harper and Steers wrote "You Deserve a Break Today," with music composed by Sid Woloshin. The debut television spot featured John Amos, 3 years before Good Times, 5 before Roots. Advertising Age later rated it the #1 jingle of the 20th century. 4 years later, the Big Mac got its own incantation. 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. A sentence so embedded in American consciousness that people who've never eaten a Big Mac can recite it from memory. Burger Chef's ad spend under General Foods ran about $2.5 million a year through McCann Erickson. Against McDonald's national campaigns, backed by the cash flow from thousands of restaurants and a stock price that rewarded every quarter of growth, it was tissue paper against a locomotive. On April 21, 1965, McDonald's had gone public on the New York Stock Exchange. 700 locations, underwritten by Payne, Weber, Jackson, and Curtis, at $22.50 a share. First day close near 30. By month's end, 50. 12 stock splits later, a 100-share IPO purchase, $2,250, would grow to more than 32,000 shares. The IPO gave Kroc a war chest no Jell-O subsidiary could match. Kroc spent it globally. McDonald's opened in Richmond, British Columbia on June 1, 1967, the first international location. Costa Rica followed in December 1970. Then the floodgates, the Netherlands in August 1971. Japan on July 20th. Den Fujita opening the Ginza Tokyo store. West Germany in December. Australia in December. The United Kingdom on October 1, 1974, in Woolwich, southeast London. The first drive-thru opened in 1975 at Sierra Vista, Arizona, serving soldiers from Fort Huachuca who wanted to eat without leaving their cars. By decade's end, McDonald's was in Brazil, Singapore, and more than a dozen other countries. Burger Chef, under General Foods, tried 10 locations in Australia. All 10 closed by 1975, losing $1.3 million. But what truly separated the two chains wasn't advertising or global reach. It was the supply chain and the franchise operator pipeline. The supply chain ran on handshakes that held. In the mid-1960s, J.R. Simplot, an Idaho potato magnate, approached McDonald's with a proposal to supply frozen fries. Simplot invested $3.5 million of his own money to build the processing capacity. No contract. A handshake. Frozen fries replaced fresh cut in every McDonald's, delivering perfect consistency coast to coast at lower per unit cost. Martin Brower, a distribution partner since 1956, became the dedicated logistics arm. Golden State Foods, Lopez Foods, Keystone Foods, each a dedicated supplier building its business around McDonald's specifications. Relationships so symbiotic that betrayal was economic suicide for both sides. Kroc called the architecture the three-legged stool. Corporation, franchisees, suppliers, each supporting the other two. Pull one leg out and the whole thing falls. Even McDonald's wasn't immune to internal conflict. Harry Sunborn, the man who designed the real estate model that made everything else possible, had become president and CEO in 1959. After the 1965 IPO, he turned conservative. He instituted a development moratorium in 1965 to 66, refusing to open new locations while the company consolidated. Kroc wanted to accelerate. The two men stopped speaking. Sonneborn resigned in the spring of 1967 and sold his McDonald's stock for approximately $3 million. Had he held it through the decade, it would have been worth over $100 million by 1977. At his death in 1992, it would have approached $1 billion. Sunborn built the machine that made McDonald's unstoppable and left before it finished accelerating. But here's the critical contrast with what was happening at Burger Chef under General Foods. When Sunborn left, Kroc replaced him with Fred Turner, the grillman from Des Plaines who'd written the 75-page operations manual, the man who understood the restaurants from the flat top up. Turner became president in 1968, CEO in 1973, chairman in 1977. The succession was internal. The knowledge was preserved. The culture continued. At General Foods, the founder was gone by 1970, and the men who replaced him had never flipped a burger in their lives. The franchise operator pipeline was where the menu was born. Lou Groen, a Cincinnati franchisee in a heavily Catholic neighborhood where Friday sales cratered because nobody bought burgers during Lent, invented the Filet-O-Fish in 1962. Jim Delegati created the Big Mac in Uniontown, Pennsylvania in 1967, national rollout the following year. Herb Peterson developed the Egg McMuffin in Santa Barbara. It went national in 1975, cracking open the breakfast daypart that would eventually generate more than a quarter of McDonald's total revenue. Lytton Cochran, a Tennessee operator, created the hot apple pie. In Philadelphia, franchisee Don Tuffish partnered with Fred Hill of the Philadelphia Eagles to found the first Ronald McDonald House in 1974, converting brand equity into a children's charity that would grow to hundreds of locations worldwide. And in 1968, Herman Petty became McDonald's first black franchisee, opening on Chicago's South Side. A deliberate move to root the brand in communities other chains had written off. None of this happened at Burger Chef, not because the people lacked talent. Frank Thomas had been a genuine innovator. The flame broiler, the combo meal, the works bar, the Funmeal. But Thomas was gone by 1970, and General Foods had no mechanism for capturing creativity from the field. Burger Chef's territorial franchisees, many of them managing multiple locations through hired staff, weren't on the grill at 6 in the morning experimenting with egg sandwiches. They weren't Lou Grown, desperate about Friday sales in a Catholic zip code and inventing a fish sandwich out of raw necessity. The owner-operator model that Kroc had insisted on, the model that seemed slower and less profitable in 1958, was generating a pipeline of bottom-up innovation that no corporate R&D department could replicate. McDonald's menu wasn't designed in a boardroom. It was invented in the restaurants by the people who ran them because those people had their houses on the line. Chapter 11. The year everything was true at once. In 1972, both of these things were simultaneously true. Burger Chef had 1,200 restaurants across 39 states, and it had already lost. The numbers looked competitive if you glanced quickly. McDonald's had 2,200. Burger Chef had 1,200, less than 2 to 1. Burger Chef was still 55% of McDonald's size, a genuine competitor, a real number 2, the kind of presence that kept McDonald's executives checking the mirror. But ratios don't capture trajectories. McDonald's had opened its 1,000th restaurant in 1968 and its 2,200th in 1972. It was accelerating. Burger Chef had reached 1,200 in 1972 and would never open another. The next year, the count dropped to 1,050, then lower. 1,200 was a ceiling disguised as a step, and the people inside the company could feel the air thinning even if the press releases didn't say so. The Indiana History blog would later claim that in 1971, Burger Chef was poised to surpass McDonald's. It wasn't. The closest the gap ever got was late 1968, when the General Foods sale closed. McDonald's at roughly 1,000, Burger Chef somewhere between 600 and 730. Burger Chef was never ahead. But there existed a plausible universe in which an independent Burger Chef, controlled by its founder, funded by its own IPO, could have remained competitive, could have built the supply chain partnerships, could have kept the flame lit and the works bar stocked and the Funmeal boxes running, could have been what Wendy's eventually became, a genuine third pillar. That universe ended in White Plains. General Foods had expanded Burger Chef from roughly 700 units to 1,200 in 4 years. A new restaurant every 48 hours during 1971 alone. Tex Cook admitted as much to the New York Times in July 1972, in a piece headlined "General Foods Sees Burger Chef in Black." Cook's actual words, "We overextended ourselves, primarily by assuming extensive real estate commitments and expanding too rapidly." He said this publicly. What he didn't say was what the internal memo said. In 1971, an internal General Foods memorandum, later produced in franchise litigation and quoted in the Sixth Circuit's opinion in O'Neill v. Burger Chef Systems, described the chain as a bear by the tail, burdened with liabilities, impossible to sell because the brand was damaged, impossible to close because of franchise obligations that would trigger lawsuits from hundreds of operators who'd mortgaged their homes on the Burger Chef name. A bear by the tail. The Jell-O company had grabbed something alive, something powerful, something built on fire, and it couldn't hold on, and it couldn't let go. That same year, General Foods took a write-down on the Burger Chef investment. The Seventh Circuit's opinion in Vaughn v. General Foods, citing discovery documents, puts the figure at $80 million. 3 years after purchase, 460 stores were closed in the 1971 to 72 retrenchment. 908 remained open. Cumulative operating losses through 1974 reached an estimated $83 million. And then came the quiet decision. The one that didn't make the papers. The one that killed the chain more thoroughly than any write-down or store closure ever could. In the 1970s, General Foods replaced Burger Chef's flame broilers with electric griddles. The chain whose identity rested on fire. The taste of a burger cooked over open gas flames, the char and the sizzle and the smoke that hit you in the parking lot, had its flame extinguished by a corporation that decided the equipment was too costly to maintain. The electric griddles were cheaper, easier to clean, less training required, and they produced a burger that tasted exactly like everyone else's burger. The single attribute that made a Burger Chef hamburger different from a McDonald's hamburger. The flame, the char, the thing Frank Thomas had spent a decade perfecting in his father's factory, was gone. Removed by a company that made instant pudding. A block of Southern franchisees saw what was happening and revolted. They broke away and formed a rival chain called Mr. Cook Restaurants, named, with undisguised contempt, after Tex Cook himself. The rebellion was small and ultimately futile. But it was the sound of the franchise system cracking. The menu, meanwhile, was drifting. General Foods poured money into salad bars, over $5 million in central Indiana alone, with little payoff. The chain that had succeeded on simplicity, 15-cent burgers, 15-cent fries, 15-cent shakes, was being loaded with items that confused the kitchen and confused the customer. The Works bar was still there, but the identity around it was blurring. Were they a burger chain? A salad chain? A family restaurant? General Foods kept changing the answer, and franchisees kept paying for the experiments. That same year, 1971, McCann Erickson resigned the Burger Chef account, an advertising agency walking away from a General Foods subsidiary. $2.5 million in billings, abandoned. Agencies don't resign profitable accounts because of creative differences. They resign them because the brand is in freefall, and the agency's name on the work has become a liability. Ogilvy and Mather took over. But the departure was a signal. To the industry, to competitors, to the surviving franchisees, that couldn't be papered over with a new campaign. General Foods issued what Time magazine later described as an ill-advised redesign of the logo and attempted to revive a handful of stalled initiatives. 4 different logos. 4 different store designs. Across the 1970s, locations that had once been instantly recognizable, the diamond roofline, the orange and yellow palette, the kite-shaped pylon, were repainted, reshaped, and rebranded into buildings that looked nothing like each other. The chain that Harry Cooler had designed to be its own advertisement had been redesigned into anonymity. General Foods even relocated the Burger Chef executive team away from Indianapolis headquarters, a move that the industry book Flameout would later call one of the most comical and fatal errors of the entire debacle. A fast food chain's operational leadership separated from its operations. McDonald's, in 1971, launched You Deserve a Break Today. One chain was firing its 4th logo designer. The other was recording the most successful jingle in the history of American commerce. The gap was about to become a canyon, and before it did, something happened in a Burger Chef parking lot in Speedway, Indiana, that would scar the brand in ways no corporate restructuring could repair. Chapter 12. November 17, 1978. Speedway, Indiana, is a small town built around a racetrack. 5 square miles, population under 13,000. It sits just west of Indianapolis, close enough to share a zip code, but independent enough to have its own police department, its own fire station, its own identity. By the fall of 1978, Speedway had been shaken twice already that year. In July, a woman named Julia Cyphers had been murdered, only the third homicide in the town's 52-year history. In September, a series of bombings ripped through the community. The Speedway bombings, later attributed to Brett Kimberlin. The police department was stretched thin, traumatized, and inclined to minimize anything that looked like it might be one more crisis they couldn't handle. On the evening of Friday, November 17, 1978, 4 employees were working the closing shift at the Burger Chef at 572 5 Crawfordsville Road. It was cool and drizzly. The scheduled closing time was 11 o'clock. Jane Freet was 20 years old. She was the assistant manager, an Avon High School graduate, a college student, someone who'd been working at Burger Chef since she was 17. She'd started at the 38th Street and Lafayette Road location before transferring to the Speedway store that spring. People who knew her called her Sweet Jane. She had dimples and a laugh that carried across the dining room. She drove a white 1974 Chevrolet Vega. Ruth Ellen Shelton was 17. Born December 19, 1960, 1 month shy of her 18th birthday. A junior at Northwest High School in Indianapolis. An honor student aiming for a career in computer science. She studied voice at Indiana Central University and was active in youth ministries at Westside Church of the Nazarene. She just left a job at the Dunkin' Donuts next door to take the Burger Chef position. Her sister Teresa, her brother Gordon, and her parents John and Rachel were expecting her home that night. Daniel R. Davis, Danny, was 16. Born September 6, 1962. A junior at Decatur Central High School on the honor roll. A passionate photographer who planned to enlist in the Air Force. He was new to the Friday closing crew. He'd been added after a worker named Diana Dillon quit the week before. His parents, Roy and Christine Davis, had no reason to think Friday night at Burger Chef was anything other than a teenager's shift at a fast food job. Mark Flemons was 16, the youngest of 7 children of Robert Sr. and Blondell Flemons. A sophomore at Speedway High School, raised in a devout Jehovah's Witness household. He lived walking distance from the restaurant. He wasn't scheduled that night. He was covering for a coworker named Ginger. That fact, that Mark Flemons was not supposed to be there, would fuel decades of speculation about whether he was the one who recognized someone he shouldn't have recognized. Mark was the only black victim. All 4 were wearing their Burger Chef uniforms, brown and orange polyester. The same uniforms they'd been wearing all evening, ringing up big chefs and super chefs and fries and shakes, working the counter, cleaning the broiler, sweeping the floor. The restaurant was supposed to close at 11. Sometime between 11 and midnight, something happened. The attack likely began when one of the employees, possibly Danny Davis, took trash bags out through the unlocked back door. The trash was still just inside the door when police arrived later. A 16-year-old eyewitness reported seeing 2 white men in their 30s near the restaurant. One bearded, one clean-shaven with fair hair. The 4 employees were forced into Jane Freet's white Vega. The perpetrators likely followed in an orange Ford van, according to a later witness named Alan Pruitt. At approximately 12:15 in the morning on November 18th, an off-duty Burger Chef employee named Brian Kring, 17 years old, arrived to help close up. He found the back door ajar about 3 inches. The lights were on. The office was in disarray. The cash registers and the safe were open. 2 empty currency bags sat on the counter, an empty roll of adhesive tape, The two young women's purses were still there. Their coats were still there. Roughly $581 in cash was missing, but more than $100 in coins was left in the registers. Brian Kring called the police. Shortly after 4 in the morning, Jane Fritz Vega was found abandoned a mile and a half south on the 5500 block of West 16th Street. The passenger door was unlocked. No keys inside, no recoverable fingerprints. Saturday morning, the Speedway Police Department classified the incident as a likely robbery involving irresponsible teenagers. Employees were allowed to clean the restaurant. The store reopened that same day. No crime scene photographs were taken. No fingerprints were lifted. No blood, hair, or trace evidence was collected. The back door that the perpetrators had entered through was wiped down, and the floor was mopped before anyone with a forensic kit set foot inside. Officer Buddy Ellwanger would say years later, "We screwed it up from the beginning." On Sunday afternoon, November 19th, a local property owner found the 4 bodies in a secluded wooded area of Johnson County, roughly 20 miles south of Speedway, about 2 miles west of Center Grove High School, off State Road 37. It was a known spot where teenagers went to park. All 4 were still in their brown and orange Burger Chef uniforms. Their watches were still on their wrists. Their personal money was still in their pockets. Daniel Davis had been shot multiple times in the back of the head, neck, and shoulders with a .38 caliber revolver. Execution style. Ruth Ellen Shelton had been shot multiple times with the same weapon. Also execution style. Jane Freet had been stabbed twice in the chest with a hunting knife. The handle had broken off during the attack. It was never recovered. The broken blade was lodged in her chest and was removed at autopsy. Mark Flemons had suffered blunt force head trauma. Investigators believed from a chain. He died choking on his own blood. Sergeant Stoney Vann, the Indiana State Police investigator, who would later spend 2 decades on the case, reconstructed what he believed happened. The killers ran out of bullets in their 6-shot .38 after shooting Davis and Shelton. Freet and Flemons tried to run. Freet was caught and stabbed. Flemons was bludgeoned. The investigation that followed was a jurisdictional catastrophe. 5 agencies were involved: Speedway PD, the FBI, Indiana State Police, Indianapolis PD, and the Marion County and Johnson County sheriffs. Detective Ken York was the original investigator. Lieutenant Jim Kramer and Detective Donovan Lindsay from the Indiana State Police worked the Pruitt angle. Detective Virgil Vandegrift from the Marion County Sheriff's Office would later pursue the Forrester lead for years. Lieutenant William Crafton coordinated what he could from Speedway PD. Tom Pritchard, the Johnson County Sheriff, managed the scene where the bodies were found. A scene that had already been contaminated by multiple agency vehicles driving through the wooded area, crushing whatever tire tracks, footprints, or physical evidence might have existed. The crucial 48-hour window passed without a coordinated investigative plan, without a unified chain of command, and without the crime scene evidence that had been mopped off the Burger Chef floor the morning after the abductions. Suspects came and went over the years, each one raising hopes that collapsed under scrutiny. A man in Greenwood who bragged about the killings passed a polygraph and later died by apparent suicide. A bearded man in Franklin shaved his 5-year beard the night before a police lineup, a detail that struck investigators as consciousness of guilt. But he died of a heart attack before charges could be brought. His son later told police his father had confided involvement before dying. Danny White and Danny Minai were arrested early and cleared. Jane Freet's brother Jimmy was briefly investigated for a possible drug debt connection. He'd been arrested in March 1981 on cocaine trafficking charges, but was released within 6 days. Alan Pruitt came forward in 1981 claiming he'd witnessed the abductions and named 2 men, Jeff Reed, known as King of the Snake Pit, and Tim Willoughby, as the killers. Pruitt's credibility was disputed. Willoughby later disappeared and was himself suspected in the murder of his girlfriend, Mary Ann Higginbotham. And then, in December 1984, a man named Donald Wayne Forrester made a phone call from the Pendleton Correctional Facility. Forrester was 34, inmate number 2242, beginning a 95-year sentence for a Hamilton County rape. He was about to be transferred to Indiana State Prison in Michigan City, a facility notoriously hostile to sex offenders. He wanted out of that transfer, and he said he could tell investigators what happened at the Burger Chef in Speedway. On tape, Forrester confessed to shooting Daniel Davis and Ruth Ellen Shelton. He led detectives to the exact secluded clearing in Johnson County where the bodies had been found. He described the body positions accurately. He knew an unpublicized detail: the broken knife handle lodged in Jane Freet's chest. He said he'd thrown the .38 into the White River from a specific bridge. He named 3 accomplices. His story: Jane's brother Jimmy owed drug money. Forrester and his associates went to the restaurant to pressure Jane. Mark Flemons intervened, fell, hit his head on a van bumper. Believing they'd killed him, the group decided to eliminate all witnesses. In August 1986, Detective Mel Wilsey of the Marion County Sheriff's Department obtained a warrant and dug up the septic tank at Forrester's former house. He sifted through raw sewage, literally crawling through the waste of a convicted rapist's former home. He found several spent .38 caliber shell casings. Forrester had also told detectives that his ex-wife had driven him back to the woods days after the murders to retrieve shell casings from the scene and that they'd flushed them down the toilet. The physical evidence supported the confession. The specificity of his knowledge, the exact location, the body positions, the broken knife handle, supported the confession. Everything pointed toward a resolution. The case seemed solved. Detective Virgil Vandegrift of the Marion County Sheriff's Office believed it was solved. He wrote as much years later. The case was solved. Then on November 14, 1986, someone inside the Marion County Sheriff's Department leaked Forrester's cooperation to the press. Who leaked it and why has never been established. 3 days later, November 17, 1986, the 8th anniversary of the murders, Forrester recanted everything. He said the confession had been coerced. He said detectives had fed him the details. He said he'd made it all up to avoid the transfer to Michigan City. On December 22, 1986, Marion County prosecutor Stephen Goldsmith, who would later serve as mayor of Indianapolis, announced that Forrester would not be charged. The physical evidence, the matching details, the shell casings pulled from sewage, all of it apparently insufficient without a cooperating witness. Donald Wayne Forrester died of cancer in prison in 2006 at the age of 55. He never spoke about the Burger Chef murders again. The 3 accomplices he named were never charged. The .38 was never recovered from the White River. The broken knife handle was never found. The case file grew thicker and colder with every passing year. The case remains officially unsolved. Sergeant Stoney Vann worked it from 1998 until his retirement in 2018. "This is the type of case," Vann said, "that I will take to my grave." Sergeant Bill Dalton took over in 2018 and publicly released the photograph of the broken knife blade for the first time, 40 years after it killed Jane Freet. In November 2018, the community built a memorial at Leonard Park in Speedway. 4 red oak trees, one for each victim, each with a plaque. A marble bench. The donations exceeded the fundraising goal in under 24 hours. The dedication was November 10th, 2018. In 2020, journalists Ina Kane and attorney Kevin Greenlee launched the Murder Sheet podcast's You Never Can Forget miniseries. More than 30 episodes through 2023. Breaking new reporting, including an admission by witness Mary Rain that she had intentionally given investigators a flawed description of the clean-shaven suspect. Luke Rinderman and Adam Camion directed The Speedway Murders, which premiered at the Adelaide Film Festival in October 2023 and received a U.S. theatrical release on June 21, 2024. Julie Young published The Burger Chef Murders in Indiana through the History Press in 2019. Teresa Jeffries, Ruth's sister, said, "What no investigation has been able to resolve. I hope before my time on Earth is gone that I have those answers." Burger Chef posted a $25,000 reward. An anonymous donor added $10,000. It didn't matter. The crime hit the company where it lived. Burger Chef was headquartered in Indianapolis, and the murders happened 5 miles from the corporate offices. The brand was already weakened by a decade of General Foods mismanagement, and now it carried something worse than corporate dysfunction. It carried grief and fear. And the image of 4 teenagers in their work uniforms lying in the woods on a Sunday afternoon, 20 miles from the restaurant where they'd been mopping floors 2 nights before. For the families, the pain compounded with every year that passed without justice. Jane Freet's mother, Carolyn, lived the rest of her life without knowing who killed her daughter. Ruth Shelton's parents, John and Rachel, watched the investigation stall and the leads go cold. Roy and Christine Davis buried a 16-year-old son who'd only been on the Friday crew because someone else had quit the week before. Robert and Blondell Flemons buried the youngest of their 7 children, a boy who wasn't even scheduled that night, who was covering for a co-worker named Ginger, who walked to work because he lived close enough that driving seemed pointless. The restaurant kept operating. The chain kept declining. And the murders became part of the landscape. A story whispered in Speedway. A cautionary tale about closing shifts and unlocked back doors. A wound in a community that had already endured bombings and homicide and was running out of the resilience that small towns like to believe they have in unlimited supply. Chapter 13. The Bear Let Go. On August the 28th, 1978, 11 weeks before the murders in Speedway, an internal General Foods memorandum identified in franchise litigation as Project Beethoven or Project B outlined what plaintiffs later characterized as a blueprint for the sale of Burger Chef. The code name itself was telling: Beethoven, the composer who went deaf, a name chosen for a plan to shut down a company that had stopped listening to its own customers. The memo's existence became central to the franchise lawsuits that followed the 1982 sale, because it suggested General Foods knew by 1978 that it intended to divest, while it continued to solicit investment from franchisees under a conference theme of whatever it takes. The Seventh Circuit ultimately ruled that the memo did not constitute a firm decision triggering a legal duty to disclose. But the timing is devastating regardless. In August 1978, General Foods was quietly planning to sell. In November 1978, 4 Burger Chef employees were murdered in their uniforms. In 1979, McDonald's launched the Happy Meal nationally. Built on an idea that a retired McDonald's executive would later admit came directly from Burger Chef. And the chain that invented the Funmeal, the chain that should have owned the kids' meal category for a generation, was suing McDonald's for trademark infringement with one hand, while the corporation that owned it was preparing to sell with the other. The lawsuit, Burger Chef versus McDonald's Corporation, filed in 1979, sought $5.5 million in damages for trademark infringement and unfair competition. It was dismissed. Burger Chef had never formally trademarked or patented the core elements of the Funmeal. The idea was theirs. The legal protection wasn't. $5.5 million. The Happy Meal would generate more than that in a single month within a few years. The franchise lawsuits, however, had teeth. Dozens of suits were consolidated after the 1982 sale into Burger Chef franchise litigation, MDL docket number 673, in the Northern District of Ohio. The cases alleged fraudulent non-disclosure, that General Foods knew the chain was failing, knew it intended to sell, and continued to encourage franchisee investment anyway. The franchisees who filed weren't corporations. They were people, small business owners who'd mortgaged their houses, drained their savings, taken on Burger Chef's co-signed debt, and bet their family's financial futures on a brand that their corporate parent was secretly planning to dump. Some had invested $129,000 at a time when the median American household income was roughly $12,000. They'd been told the system was strong. They'd attended conferences themed whatever it takes. And whatever it took, it turned out, was everything they had. In Vaughn versus General Foods Corporation, a group of St. Louis franchisees went to trial on a fraudulent non-disclosure theory and won a $14 million jury verdict. The Seventh Circuit reversed it on appeal, ruling that the Project Beethoven memo didn't constitute a firm decision to sell. In O'Neill versus Burger Chef Systems, a Tennessee franchisee named in the Sixth Circuit's published opinion won $175,859 in compensatory damages and $100,000 in punitive damages. The Sixth Circuit reversed that one too. Bill Mitchell settled for approximately $100,000 and kept his Danville, Illinois location branded as Burger Chef through 1996 under the agreement's terms. The pattern was consistent. Franchisees won at trial, where juries heard the full story and saw the internal memos, and lost on appeal, where the legal standard for fraudulent non-disclosure proved higher than the human standard for betrayal. A separate internal memo from 1983, after the sale was complete, described what General Foods had sold. The Burger Chef system, the memo said, was much worse than worthless. This was not a competitor's assessment. This was not a journalist's characterization. This was General Foods writing to itself about the thing it had spent 14 years and hundreds of millions of dollars destroying. Goldman Sachs had advised General Foods to hold the chain until spring of 1981 to improve its sellability. John Martin, the last-named Burger Chef division president, addressed the Franchisee Advisory Council in early 1981 trying to hold the system together. It was too late. On December 9, 1981, James L. Ferguson, who had succeeded Tex Cook as CEO in 1973 and chairman in 1974, announced the sale. His statement was the corporate equivalent of a shrug. We have concluded that this business was not central to the long-term direction that we see for General Foods. Not central? A chain that had been the second largest in America when General Foods bought it. A chain that had invented the combo meal, the kids' meal, and the self-service toppings bar. A chain that had 1,200 locations and was closing the gap with McDonald's. Not central. Arthur Larkin, the president who had championed the acquisition, who had signed the papers in White Plains in 1968, took early retirement. He told the New York Times that Burger Chef was the event that drove his departure. 14 years, $16.5 million in equity, $80 million written down, $83 million in cumulative operating losses, 460 stores closed, 4 employees murdered, and the conclusion was that the business was not central. The buyer was Imasco Limited, a Montreal-based Canadian conglomerate that also owned Imperial Tobacco, Shoppers Drug Mart, and Canada Trust. Imasco's restaurant subsidiary was Hardee's Food Systems, founded in 1960 in Greenville, North Carolina, by Leonard Rawls and James Gardner. Jack Laffery had been chairman and CEO of Hardee's since 1975, a military veteran with an appetite for acquisition. Under Laffery's leadership, Hardee's had grown into a substantial chain in its own right, concentrated in the Southeast. The Burger Chef deal would push it into the Midwest and give it a national footprint overnight. The Globe and Mail in Canada would later call Hardee's and Imasco's other acquisitions the Achilles heel of the conglomerate's diversification. Persistent restaurant losses papered over by tobacco cash flow. But in 1982, Laffery saw opportunity. The sale closed in March 1982. The price was $44 million for roughly 650 to 679 locations, about 420 of them franchised. In real economic terms, General Foods had paid $16.5 million in equity in 1968, roughly $40 million in 1982 dollars. It sold for $44 million. On paper, almost break even. But that paper doesn't account for the $80 million write-down, the $83 million in operating losses, the $5 million in salad bar modernization in central Indiana alone, the $1.3 million lost in Australia, the store closure costs, or the franchise litigation exposure. General Foods exited at a staggering real loss after 14 years of ownership. Laffery appeared on WRTV Indianapolis on November 15, 1982, cutting a $7,500 check to the Indianapolis Children's Museum. "We'll have somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,100 units in 38 states," he said. "We still have a lot of room for expansion and look forward to a very exciting future." The future was conversion, and it came fast. Corporate-owned Burger Chef locations, including 75 in central Indiana, were rapidly switched to Hardee's signage. The diamond roof lines were covered or torn down. The kite-shaped pylons came off. The orange and yellow palette was replaced with Hardee's orange star. The works bars were ripped out. The menus were replaced. New supply chains were connected. New uniforms were issued. Up to 15 additional employees were hired per converted unit. Franchisees near existing Hardee's were offered Hardee's franchise agreements. Franchisees too close to existing Hardee's operations were allowed to run out their terms as Burger Chef, but couldn't renew. And the flame broilers, already replaced with electric griddles by General Foods, stayed electric. There was nothing left to convert. The fire had been out for years. Franchisees without renewal options were abandoned. One later said, owners couldn't get advertising or support. Hardee's really didn't want any Burger Chefs open. Some independent survivors in southern Indiana and Tennessee formed a group called the Pleasers and tried to carry on under a new name. It didn't last. The conversions were complete within 2 years for corporate stores. The franchised holdouts lingered longer. But without corporate advertising, without supply chain support, without the brand investment that makes a franchise worth the royalty, they were restaurants operating on borrowed time with a name nobody was promoting. Imasco would eventually sell Hardee's to CKE restaurants in April 1997 for $327 million, 7.5 times what it had paid for Burger Chef 15 years earlier. The Burger Chef trademarks went with the sale. They've been maintained ever since, not because anyone intends to reopen a Burger Chef, but because the legal cost of maintaining a trademark is negligible compared to the risk of letting someone else claim the name. That same year, 1982, McDonald's had roughly 7,259 restaurants worldwide. Ray Kroc was 80 years old and failing. He died on January 14, 1984, in San Diego, with more than 7,500 McDonald's in operation and system-wide sales approaching $10 billion. 2 years before his death, he'd watched McDonald's join the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the first restaurant company ever added to the index. On November 30, 1984, less than a year after Kroc's death, Richard McDonald, the surviving brother, served the ceremonial 50 billionth McDonald's hamburger to company executive Ed Rensi at the Grand Hyatt in New York. The man who'd invented the speedy service system in a San Bernardino drive-in was 85 years old, handing a ceremonial burger to the representative of a corporation that had erased his role in its founding. He died in 1998. His brother Mac had died in 1971, the same year Burger Chef was writing off $80 million, and McCann Erickson was walking away from the account. The system Kroc built didn't need him once he was gone. Fred Turner was chairman. Michael Quinlan succeeded him. The machine ran on the Bible, Turner's 75-page manual, and on the lease, and on the three-legged stool, and on Hamburger University, and on 30 years of institutional memory built by people who'd started as grillmen and risen to run the company. Burger Chef had none of this. Its founder left in 1970. Its institutional memory was erased by General Foods. Its operational standards were set in White Plains by people who'd never seen a flame broiler run. 2 chains, both born from the same flame broiler in the same Indianapolis factory. One sold for $44 million to a tobacco company's restaurant subsidiary. The other was worth more than the gross domestic product of most countries. Chapter 14. The Last Flame. The last Burger Chef locations died slowly, one by one, over 14 years. Hank Schroeder's franchise in Danville, Illinois, had been operating since 1960. The patriarch of the system. His son, Butch, had signed a 10-year lease just before the 1982 sale, which allowed him to keep the Burger Chef branding until 1991. After that, he went independent as Schroeder's Drive-In, still serving the same burgers, still using the same equipment, just without the name. Hank died in 1998. Butch eventually sold to Dan Dubois in 2007, who ran it until an abrupt closure on October 21, 2014. It reopened the following September under Sue Walton, Dale Terrell, Kara Larson, and Daniel Walton. Then closed again in January 2017 over a parking lot lease dispute with Butch Schroeder and property owner John Kentner. The last operator of what fans called the last true Burger Chef couldn't agree on the rent for the parking lot. It's permanently closed now. Bill Mitchell, the franchisee who'd settled his lawsuit for about $100,000, kept his Danville location branded as Burger Chef through 1996 under the settlement terms. The Cookeville, Tennessee, location on East 10th Street, opened in 1966, one of the oldest surviving units, was the last restaurant in America to operate under the Burger Chef name. It held on through the Hardee's conversions, through the Pleasers experiment, through the years when every other Burger Chef in the country had either converted or closed. It finally shut down in July 1996, 42 years after the first flame broiler lit up in Indianapolis, 18 years after the murders in Speedway, 14 years after General Foods sold the chain for scrap. The sign came down. Nobody held a ceremony. The building later converted to a Pleasers, then cycled through other tenants. In the summer of 2008, it burned as an India Palace restaurant. The lot is an apartment complex now. There's nothing left to see. July 1996, that was the end. 42 years of burger chef, from a carpenter's son in Peru, Indiana, to a demonstration stand at an amusement park, to 1,200 restaurants in 39 states, to a Jell-O company's write-down, to 4 teenagers in the woods, to a parking lot lease dispute in Danville, to a fire in Cookeville. The arc of a restaurant chain that invented the combo meal and the kids' meal and the self-service toppings bar, and lost all 3 to competitors who had better lawyers, better corporate parents, or simply better luck. The Speedway location, 5725 Crawfordsville Road, where Jane Freet and Ruth Shelton and Danny Davis and Mark Flemons went to work on November 17, 1978, reopened the morning after the murders and kept serving customers. It cycled through businesses over the decades. The last tenant was a Cashland pawn shop, which closed in 2016. The building stood empty for 8 years, accumulating graffiti and weeds and the kind of quiet that settles on places where something terrible happened and no one wants to be reminded. Demolition began on March 21, 2024. 45 years of accumulated meaning, grief, memory, evidence that no one collected, a back door that was mopped clean before anyone thought to dust it for fingerprints. Scraped off a lot in Speedway, Indiana. The lot is empty now. There's nothing to see there anymore. There hasn't been, really, since November 18, 1978. 3 former Burger Chef locations still operate in some recognizable form. Ross Weaver runs The Chef in Cleveland, Tennessee, built in 1967, inherited from his father, who bought it in 1992. It's famous for its hot slaw, a proprietary recipe so beloved that in 2024, the Tennessee legislature named hot slaw the state's first official state food. The Chef claims to be the only surviving Burger Chef location in the country that has never closed, just changed names. Susie's Hamburgers in South Charleston, West Virginia, operates in a preserved 1970s-era building. Jim Cowie's place, named for his wife, the area supervisor's wife, who gave the restaurant its name when the Burger Chef branding was no longer an option. Pete's Burgers in Reidsville, North Carolina, still runs a works bar. The stainless steel compartments, the tongs, the unlimited toppings. All 3 use electric griddles. The General Foods legacy. None of them serve a flame-broiled burger. The fire has been out for 50 years. Across the country, the buildings tell the rest of the story. The original Burger Chef at 3401 West 16th Street in Indianapolis is a Burger King now. There's a grim irony in that, given that Frank Thomas's factory supplied both chains' broilers. The corporate headquarters at 1348 West 16th Street is a Kirby Risk electrical supply warehouse. In Salem, Massachusetts, a former Burger Chef became HMA Car Wash. In Peabody, it became Bill and Bob's Roast Beef. Others converted into Arby's, Chinese takeout joints, Mexican restaurants, banks, pawn shops. If you know the silhouette, the diamond roofline, the angular peak, the remnants of orange trim under new paint, you can spot them from the road. There's an entire subculture of people who do exactly this, driving through small-town America and photographing former burger chefs the way birdwatchers catalog rare species. 72 former locations documented on waymarking.com. A dedicated page on roadsidearchitecture.com. The buildings are smaller than factory ruins, but they're more intimate. Everyone has driven past a building and thought, that used to be a... The diamond is the giveaway. It's always the diamond. The brand itself passed through corporate hands like a deed to a vacant lot. Trademarks transferred to Imasco with the 1982 sale, moved to CKE Restaurants Holdings when Imasco sold Hardee's in April 1997 for $327 million, and now sit with Rourke Capital, which acquired CKE in 2013. In January 2007, a Chicago company called River West Brands filed a trademark cancellation petition against Hardee's, alleging abandonment. Hardee's responded by briefly reintroducing the Big Chef in April 2007. Select Midwestern markets, employees wearing Burger Chef uniforms, a burst of nostalgia marketing that lasted a few weeks. River West dropped the petition in April 2009. The Big Chef appeared again in 2014, tied to the Mad Men storyline. The AMC drama's producers had restored a former Burger Chef building in Rialto, California, called Jim's Burgers, to its original design for filming. A fictional advertising pitch for a dead restaurant chain, broadcast on prestige television, was the most visible thing to happen to the Burger Chef name in 30 years. Kyle Brown of Louisville, the son of a former area franchise manager, runs the Burger Chef Memories website. Darren Gibson hosts the Burger Chef podcast. Steve Bennett ran the Burger Chef Reliquary until it went offline. Collectors trade Star Wars Funmeal posters, King Kong glasses, NFL glasses, paper hats, Funmeal prizes, and the Burger Chef Wren birdhouse kits on eBay. Artifacts from a chain that vanished before the internet could preserve it in real time. The Shop Indie sells officially licensed Burger Chef t-shirts for $32 and stickers for $3. A 2024 scholarship was established at Decatur Central High School in Danny Davis's name. The Daniel Davis Photography Scholarship, founded by teachers Jason Schanzel and Robert Bowling. 46 years after a 16-year-old who loved cameras went to work on a Friday night and didn't come home. Former customers post copycat recipes for Big Chef sauce online. A 1971 to 1977 Ohio manager's version, salad dressing, relish, onions, and a dash of Frank's hot sauce. The chef's hot slaw recipe is jealously guarded. Ross Weaver won't share it, and the commercial version from Fuzz's Hot Slaw isn't quite the same. None of it tastes the way it tasted when the flame was still lit, and everyone who's tried knows it. You can approximate the sauce. You can replicate the slaw. You can buy a vintage Funmeal box on eBay for $40. What you can't buy, what you can't approximate, what you can't replicate is the experience of walking through that triangular archway, hitting that wall of charred beef smoke, and watching the flame broiler run while your mother counted out 15-cent increments at the counter. That's gone, and it's not coming back. McDonald's, as of 2025, reported total revenue of $26.885 billion. System-wide sales of $139.4 billion. Net income of $8.563 billion. It opened 2,276 new restaurants that year alone, nearly twice as many as Burger Chef had at its absolute peak. It operates in over 100 countries. 95% franchised. Over 2 million employees system-wide. 70 million customers a day. Market capitalization in April 2026. Roughly $217 to $233 billion. McDonald's opens more new restaurants every 7 weeks than Burger Chef had at its entire 1,200 location peak. McDonald's 2025 net income, a single year, is about 195 times the $44 million price Burger Chef sold for in 1982. Adjust that sale price for inflation, and it comes to roughly $147 million in today's dollars. Still less than 1/58th of McDonald's single-year profit. Chapter 15. 4 trees in a speedway. Arc. Something becomes clear when you trace the arc of these two chains from the same flame broiler in the same Indianapolis factory to where they ended up. The food didn't kill Burger Chef. The burgers were good, flame-broiled, charred, dressed at a works bar that was ahead of its time by decades. The ideas didn't kill it. The combo meal, the kids' meal, the self-service toppings bar were all Burger Chef firsts. The people didn't kill it. Frank Thomas Jr. was a genuine innovator, and the franchisees who ran the restaurants on the ground did their jobs with pride and competence for as long as they were allowed to. What killed Burger Chef was the decision to hand it to people who didn't understand what it was. General Foods bought a restaurant chain and tried to run it like a product line. They expanded without operational infrastructure. They replaced the cooking technology that made the food distinctive. They redesigned the buildings until they were unrecognizable. They relocated the leadership away from the restaurants. They churned through logos and slogans and ad agencies like a corporation trying on identities in front of a mirror, never settling on one long enough for customers to recognize it. And when the losses mounted and the lawsuits multiplied and the internal memos started using words like bare and worthless, they sold it for scrap to a company that wanted the real estate and the franchise agreements and nothing else. McDonald's survived because Ray Kroc understood something that Tex Cook and Arthur Larkin never did. The food is the product, but the system is the business. The owner-operator who stakes his house on a single restaurant will care more about the fries than any regional VP ever will. The lease that can be pulled for a dirty bathroom enforces quality more effectively than any corporate memo. The supplier who builds his company around your specifications becomes an extension of your kitchen. And the consistency, the absolute obsessive manual specified Hamburger University certified consistency, is what turns a restaurant into a brand and a brand into an institution. Burger Chef had the food. It had the ideas. It had a 3-year head start on the Big Mac and a 6-year head start on the Happy Meal. What it didn't have, what it lost the day Frank Thomas Jr. signed the papers in White Plains, was control. And in the restaurant business, control is everything. Ask any franchisee who watched a corporate owner remodel their store into something the regulars didn't recognize. Ask any cook who was told to disconnect the flame broiler and plug in a griddle. Ask any area supervisor who watched the sign come down for the last time. And the ideas that Burger Chef couldn't protect, the Funmeal, the combo meal, the works bar, didn't disappear. They migrated. McDonald's took the kids' meal and turned it into the most successful marketing device in fast food history. Wendy's took the salad bar. Five Guys took the build-your-own-toppings concept. Each of them built empires on ideas that originated in an Indianapolis factory in the 1950s and 1960s. In the mind of an engineer's son who understood that a flame-broiled burger dressed by the customer's own hand was something no flat griddle competitor could match. Paul Schrage said it in 2019. The idea came from Burger Chef. The profits went elsewhere. And the chain that invented the future of fast food wasn't around to collect. In Leonard Park, Speedway, Indiana, 4 red oak trees stand in a row. Each one has a plaque at its base. Jane Freet, Ruth Ellen Shelton, Daniel Davis, Mark Flemons. A marble bench faces the trees. The community raised the money in under 24 hours. The dedication was November 10th, 2018, 40 years and a week after 4 teenagers went to work on a Friday night and didn't come home. There are 45,356 McDonald's restaurants on Earth. There are 0 burger chefs. The closest you can get is a place called The Chef in Cleveland, Tennessee, where the hot slaw is famous enough to be named a state food, and the building is the original 1967 structure, and the broiler is electric, and the name on the sign is different, and the fire has been out since the 1970s. But Teresa Jeffries is still waiting. Ruth's sister, still alive, still asking. I hope before my time on Earth is gone that I have those answers. The answers haven't come. The flame broiler is cold. The diamonds are painted over. The kids' meal belongs to someone else. And in a small park in a small town in Indiana, 4 trees grow a little taller every year, rooted in the same ground where a restaurant used to be, where families used to line up on Friday nights, where 4 young people in brown and orange polyester went to work and never came home.